His style isn't just refined and clean, it's also included ideas that were and continue to be cutting edge. To many, he represented an inspirational figure that personified the best that Poi and flow arts had to offer. Speaking of people who don't get the credit they deserve, what up friends, Drex here from Drex Factor Poi, sharing with you the love of poi spinning and flow arts to benefit your body and brain, and today I want to talk about some of the greatest practitioners of the art and what makes them great. But first, a quick shout out to the friends of the channel. Big thanks to Dark Monk, Flow Fests, Flow Toys, Juggling Calling, Pyroterra Light Toys, Spinballs, and Ultrapoi for helping to make the videos on this channel possible. You can learn more about all of these amazing businesses and what they're doing to support flow artists like yourself by checking out the links that I have down in the description of this video. And special thanks to non-business friends of the channel, Johnny Howard, Lain Mochinsky, and Pekka Pekkonen. Thank you so very much for your support for my work and my mission. If you're not familiar, the GOAT is a concept that's been thrown around in sports and hip-hop spaces for the better part of 30 years. It stands for greatest of all time, and it's kind of intrinsically tied to competitive pursuits, where standing out and being recognized for one's skill is baked into the culture. I don't necessarily think that's a perfect fit for flow arts, though. For one thing, competition can be deeply controversial, with some seeing it as anathema to the art. For another, the concept of the GOAT is frequently linked to spaces that are more likely to be navigated by people from marginalized backgrounds, and Poi in its current form tends to be dominated by those who are really not. But I kind of think the idea is an interesting way to play with how we recognize influence and accomplishment. So I want to play with the idea as a thought experiment, not to put anyone up on a pedestal, but to explore the idea of whose ideas have had a huge impact on the art and why. So why not? This isn't intended as a document carved in stone or a definitive take saying these are the most important poi spinners who ever existed. It's a parlor game, and my subjective take on how the idea could apply to poi. I'm not taking this seriously, so I hope that you don't either. All that said, let's dive in. First and foremost, one piece of groundwork that I'm going to have to lay down that is kind of antithetical to the whole concept is that I'm not going to be putting forward just one person as the Poi GOAT. I'm going to be suggesting several. As I did this thought experiment, I realized there were several people I could think of that could qualify for a variety of different reasons. Western style poi spinning is still a very young art, so I think it's hard to think of just one person that's dominated poi spinning even for a single era of its history. There's a lot of different ways the art has been interpreted and engaged in, so I think it's more appropriate to acknowledge many of these lenses rather than saying that just one is the most important or the most dominant. Which, yes, does mean that I'm kind of taking the out of the GOAT, because it's not a singular person, but well, it's a thought experiment, and get off my lawn, you noisy kids. And if you're one of those that's mad at me for introducing a competitive element to the poi world and are about to send me a grumpy or passive-aggressive comment, the good news is that if you don't like the rules, you don't have to play the game. Don't watch the video. We'll both be happier. So with all that said, in my mind, to qualify as the greatest of all time for poi, you have to meet all of the following three qualifications. First, you must be influential. Your impact on the art must be unquestionable and widely acknowledged enough to the point that if I drop your name into casual conversation, I can be pretty sure that the poi spinners around me are going to know who I'm talking about. This isn't quite popularity, but it is close. I don't think you can be considered the greatest of all time on popularity alone, and we'll get into a little bit more of that later. Second, you must be seen as virtuosic or otherwise a role model. People want to spin like you. They want to talk about the work you do as having significantly changed the game and base their own choices as an artist on yours. Maybe you were the first person to do a particular thing or did it so perfectly that it set the standard for how everybody else ought to be doing it. Third, that contribution must have stood the test of time. There's no shortage of brief fads in the poi world that blow up for a year or two and then sort of fade off into irrelevance. The things a poi GOAT must add to the conversation must continue to be a part of the conversation to the present day. And yes, that does mean that by all time, we really mean up to the present. But that limitation is built into the concept to begin with. It also means that I don't think it's appropriate to put anybody on this list whose work has appeared only within the past couple years or so, because it just hasn't had a chance to stand the test of time. I actually started listing out people I thought could qualify before I came up with these criteria. And once I did, it meant that I kind of had to cut down the list by about half. So first up, I'd like to talk about some of the people who I removed from the running once I had these criteria in place and why. First and foremost, Nick Woolsey, who, as it stands currently, is the most popular and arguably most influential poi spinner in history. He's the guy who inspired me to start creating videos and taught me most of what I learned in my first 2 years. I'm sure I'm not the only one for whom that's true either. Nick definitely matches most of the criteria, but I'd argue that while he's seen as influential, I don't think that many people see him as virtuosic. In his day, his approach to flowers was truly revolutionary, but he's been kind of a victim of his own success, in that he's popularized flowers to the point that they're just seen as a basic part of the poi vocabulary now. His flow and dance are both incredible and have inspired no shortage of people, but ironically, I think I see more virtuosity out of many of the people that he inspired. And that's not to take anything away from Nick. You can be the most popular poi spinner and also not the most virtuosic. You can be an amazing teacher and not necessarily push the envelope on what's possible with the prop. We all owe Nick a great debt, but I don't think the GOAT is really the best fit for how we think of his place in poi history. Next is Charlie Cushing, whose 9-square theory, QFT, 8-step caps, framework for understanding toroids, and research into how we attain flow states as flow artists encompassed a huge swath of past and present poi knowledge. Charlie could easily get the greatest of all time in my book, but for the fact that lots of people nowadays simply don't know that he exists. He was never much of a self-promoter, and a lot of his contributions went on to become more cult hits than mainstream poi ideas. He's definitely worth checking out though, and you may discover that he's one of these lost gems of the past decade's worth of poi. Speaking of people who don't get the credit they deserve, there's Leo Ikaza. Leo is definitely one of these guys who in retrospect was far more influential than he gets credit for. He fleshed out the framework for horizontal stacking and developed one of the most comprehensive systems for exploring body tracers. But his overall spinning style was one that is something of an acquired taste, so he never received a huge amount of recognition for these contributions. Leo definitely deserves better in terms of his spot in poi history, but he still just misses a spot in my final analysis. Next up, there's Surreal Human. Yes, that's his real name. A guy who radically changed the poi game, but who was also a cautionary tale of fading into obscurity. Simply put, if you do contact poi, it's because of Surreal. His video Mana Poi was what actually started the contact poi revolution that we are still experiencing in the poi world. It exploded the vocabulary and trick set for the art, and later he tried to do the same for poi throws. At a certain point though, he kind of moved on or kept his work behind a paywall, and Mana Poi itself was permanently taken down due to a copyright dispute over the music featured in it. Without having easily accessible new material and having his most influential work be inaccessible, Surreal kind of faded from the poi consciousness. I can't remember the last time I heard someone bring him up in conversation. And finally, there's Jon Alvarez. I think for people who are spinning now, it might be difficult to fathom the fact that there was a good 2 years there where Jon was quite simply everywhere. His gunslinger and 3-poi style of spinning quite literally came from seemingly out of nowhere and caught the entire poi world off guard. He vaulted virtually overnight from obscurity to one of the most recognized and respected poi spinners in the world. More than that, to many he represented an inspirational figure that personified the best that poi and flow arts had to offer. And that fame became as much a burden to him as it was a blessing. He tried multiple times to take a break and then come back, but every time it seemed to take a toll on his mental and physical health. As of right now, to the best of my knowledge, he's still out there and still flowing, but only doing so privately, with only a small circle of people close to him. He's made it pretty clear that he wants privacy, and we should really all give it to him. So, having ruled out those 5 poi spinners, who would I suggest is in the running for the greatest of all time? Here are 5 presented in no particular order. First up, Ronan McLaughlin. Ronan invented contact poi, and for that contribution alone, he deserves to be considered for this list. But even more than that, he's an artist who has made significant contributions to poi knowledge across 3 different decades. His style isn't just refined and clean, it's also included ideas that were and continue to be cutting edge. There's a kind of irony in the fact that Ronan independently developed many of the same concepts that came out of 9-square theory, such as 8-step caps, but because he was working in isolation, was neither aware of Charlie's work, nor did he get much credit for them, as Charlie had already published his work on the topic. In addition, it could be argued that his approach to poi stacking is a neglected corner of the poi world that did have an influence on the later horizontal stacking movement. And currently, his approach to reframing timing and direction according to the 4 classic elements is gaining adherence. The guy is definitely still in the game and still inspiring others. Much respect. Next up would be Ivan Gorbanov, or as he's better known, Mel. Put simply, I think Mel is one of the greatest performers the Poi world has ever produced. He knows how to own a stage like absolutely no one else I've ever seen. But add to that the fact that he's been hugely influential in the tech Poi world as well. He brings together these two elements of Poi like few people who have ever picked up the tool. His Red Pants video was arguably the last great tech blog, and it gave rise to the horizontal stacking movement that's still an integral part of Poi vocabulary. The fact that he's still very active and still moving the needle today is just icing on the cake. And he also makes me feel a little conflicted about my next possible pick, Yuda Imamura. So here's the thing. If you're a little sore with me for saying Nick isn't seen as a virtuoso, Yuda is part of the reason why I'm making that claim. He has Nick's fluidity and arguably takes the dance side of Nick's work even further than Nick does, while at the same time incorporating technical tricks into his spinning that are seen as cutting edge even to this day. It's also weird having both Mel and Yuda sitting next to each other here because in my mind, there's a deep connection to them. To my eyes, Mel's highly technical but still fluid and dancey style owes a lot to Yuda. I really think that Yuda, and for that matter Thomas Johansson, walked so Mel could run. So do you reward the origin of the approach or the way that somebody else embellished it? I don't know. Yuda is also still active and from what I can tell still hugely influential, but just within a much smaller sphere than he used to reach. He's doing amazing work right now with programmable Poi that shifts the expression of Poi as an art beyond simply the tricks and into the realm of what's possible with the prop itself. Highly recommended to check out. Another possibility? And I will fully admit that this is heavily my own bias, but I would also like to throw Alien John's name into the ring. Put simply, if your approach to spinning is to execute highly technical tricks while your feet stay planted as a tech tree, you are working in the mold that John established with the Arizona Poi transmission video way back in 2008. John pioneered the creation of tech Poi frameworks, gave the Poi world unit circle theory, and refined the language around cat eyes, to say nothing of really being the person who introduced the idea of tech Poi as being the parameterization of Poi tricks. If you've ever broken down Poi into a system of variables and come up with new patterns to learn by tweaking one or more of those variables, you are using the tools that John introduced to the Poi world. He's fallen a bit into obscurity in the past couple years as he shifted his focus to selling fiber optic whips rather than pushing new Poi tech, but in terms of raw influence, I think he may sit near the top of the pack for everyone I've mentioned here thus far. And lest you think I only care about Poi spinners who've been on the scene since the late 2000s, there's one final possibility I'd love to throw out there. Tim Goddard. Put simply, there have been multiple times in the past decade when, from my perspective, Tim was the best Poi spinner in the world. It's not just that he can do difficult tricks, it's that he's one of the few Poi spinners who actually learns how to do absolutely everything. Tim does traditional tech. He juggles, he does gunslingers, he blends in different forms of physical athleticism. Lots of people do one thing well. Tim does a lot of things well. So there you have it. Would anybody that I've listed here make your pick for the greatest of all time? Leave me a comment and let me know who and why. And let me know if you'd pick somebody I didn't talk about. And hey, did anyone else think it was kind of weird that nearly all these picks are white cisgendered men? Yeah, I did too. What's that say about this community and the people that we see in it? I think that's a conversation we ought to have too. Did you get anything out of this video? If so, please make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe to keep the conversation going and to help my channel grow. This video would not be possible without the kind support of all of these wonderful people right here. These are my Flow patrons over on Patreon, and they, along with the folks listed down in the description, help to make this video and all the videos on this channel possible. Thank you all so much for supporting my work and making it possible for me to continue making content. If you'd like to get your name highlighted in my videos or just support my work in general, you can do so by heading over to patreon.com/DrexFactorPoi and signing up. You can do that at the link down in the description or by clicking on the card that just popped up if you are watching this video on YouTube. There you can get access to a whole host of awesome rewards, and even better than that, help make sure I can keep on producing these videos for people all over the world to enjoy. And with that, I shall take my leave. I hope you enjoyed playing this game with me, and I'd love to see your own GOAT lists. Who do you think has made a really lasting impact? Who do you think changed the game? If there was a Poi Hall of Fame, Who do you think deserves a spot in it? Leave me a comment and let me know. In the meantime, I will leave a link to a playlist of other vlogs like this one down in the description or up on screen if you're watching on YouTube. Be sure to get out and get your flow on, and I'll see you with a new video on Wednesday. Peace.